¿Cómo les va? Bienvenidos a otra emisión de Filmoteca Online. Hemos dado acá en más de una ocasión películas educativas, películas producidas exclusivamente para su uso en las aulas, para su uso didáctico, ¿no? La Enciclopedia Británica, por ejemplo, hizo varios de estos films. Bueno, hubo una empresa que se llamaba Coronet, que también se especializó en películas educativas. Y hoy vamos a ver precisamente una película Coronet que habla sobre la geografía de Argentina, Uruguay y Paraguay. Todas estas localidades exóticas unidas por el Río de la Plata y el Paraná. Está hablada en inglés, pero lo que dice es justamente de intención didáctica, lo dice de manera muy clara y simple, y van a ver ustedes una hermosa cantidad de material de archivo del momento en el que la película se filmó, 1961. No sé si les conté que como acá no tenemos Cinemateca Nacional, cualquier material de archivo sobre nuestro país y aledaños es de por sí valioso, aunque provenga de un film educativo sin ningún valor artístico preexistente, ¿no? Así que acá va entonces geografía de Argentina, Uruguay y Paraguay esta noche en Filmoteca Online.
This is the mouth of the Plata-Paraná River. Although it looks like a huge bay, it is the wide mouth of a river system that reaches deep into the South American continent. Even ocean-going ships can sail up the Plata, which is kept deep enough by dredging. Many ships travel a long way to this great river to trade with the nations of the Plata. In the continent of South America, the Plata-Paraná River system includes a huge region. The rivers of this system flow through three of the nations we will study: Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, the three nations of the Plata. Buenos Aires in Argentina, Asuncion in Paraguay, and Montevideo in Uruguay are the capitals of their respective countries. Let's see something of these important cities. They are the leading ports of the nations of the Plata. Montevideo, on the Plata River, is the capital of Uruguay. From Montevideo, we might go across the river by ship to the west side of the Plata, to Buenos Aires. Buenos Aires is the largest city in South America and the capital of Argentina. To reach the third capital city, Asuncion, we might take a boat to make the long trip up the Paraná and Paraguay rivers. Although Asuncion is far inland, it is an important river port. It is also the capital and largest city in Paraguay. Buildings and business streets in Asuncion are somewhat less modern than those in Buenos Aires or Montevideo. Asuncion is an old city that still has reminders of its past Spanish history. Perhaps part of the reason is that much of Paraguay has not changed a great deal from its earlier days. More than two-thirds of the Paraguayan people are farmers or herders. Their farms are small, and they still use traditional methods of working the land. Walking plows, drawn by oxen, are still common on Paraguayan farms. Farming is one of the two leading occupations in Paraguay. The other is grazing. Grazing in Paraguay is on a smaller scale than in Argentina or Uruguay. The lack of modern means of transportation is one of the things that have hindered Paraguay's economic growth. In Uruguay, the story is different. Here we see signs of modern developments. Uruguay is a country of grass-clad slopes and rolling hills, with many wooded valleys and streams. It is a good land for grazing, and much of the country of Uruguay is given over to raising large herds of sheep. A good part of Uruguay's wealth comes from fine sheep such as these, especially from their wool, which is sold to other countries. In Argentina, too, we find grazing on a large scale. The Great Plains are called the Pampas, and they are Argentina's most productive lands. The Indian word Pampas means plains. The Argentine Pampas are vast. They are 1/4 of the total area of Argentina. As in Uruguay and Paraguay, we find grazing here, but the greater emphasis is on cattle grazing. The cattle and cowboys on the Argentine Pampas may remind us of scenes on the Great Plains of the United States or Canada. The Argentine cowboys, called gauchos, are colorfully dressed. Scenes like this were common in the early days of Argentina. Gauchos preparing barbecued beef outdoors and drinking a certain kind of tea called mate. Today in modern Argentina, the traditions of the gauchos can still be seen in some of the costumes, and especially in the love of fine horsemanship. Horses are still important in cattle ranching, which is done on a huge scale. The owner of a ranch, or estancia, is called the estanciero. The estanciero runs his ranch like a business. Argentine ranchers continually improve their cattle with better stock to make Argentine beef better for export. Yes, cattle raising is a big business on the Pampas. And so is farming. In the flat plains around Buenos Aires, we can find truck farms where many kinds of vegetables are raised. Dairy farms with fine herds and fruit orchards. These places supply the cities with food products. But the big farms throughout the Pampas are the grain farms. Cornfields like this one may remind us of Iowa. There are wheat fields, too, that may remind us of Kansas or the Dakotas. On the Argentine Pampas, wheat is a big crop, as it is in the United States and Canada. Wheat grows well on the Pampas, one of the world's most fertile regions. Some of the surplus grain and cattle from Argentina are exported. In Argentina, as well as Uruguay, good railroad systems have helped to make exporting possible, taking surplus products from the land to the port cities, such as Buenos Aires. Here in Buenos Aires are stockyards filled with Argentine beef cattle, refrigerator plants where meat is prepared for overseas shipment, and grain elevators where ships from many distant lands are loaded with wheat. But Buenos Aires is not only a port. It is a center of government, and the most important of the many urban centers we find in the nations of the Plata. A large proportion of the people of Argentina and Uruguay live in cities. They work in shops and stores, in office buildings, and in many kinds of light industries. In these growing urban centers, we'll also see modern, busy downtown districts, theaters and other amusement centers, sports events, and parks. All these are as much a part of life in the Plata countries as are the farms and ranches. In Uruguay, about 1/3 of the total population lives in the city of Montevideo on the Plata River. Montevideo is another one of South America's largest cities. It has large hospitals and other public buildings, up-to-date universities, and modern schools. And yet this progress had its beginning not too long ago, when pioneers, much like those of early times in the United States, settled the land. With their oxen and carts, or carretas, they made long journeys into the rich lands of Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina to found new nations. We haven't seen all the story of the nations of the Plata. There are oil fields and oil refineries in Argentina, vineyards near the great Andes in western Argentina, plantations where the tea called mate is grown, and great forests of the Chaco that supply many different kinds of wood. These things, too, are part of the geography of these three countries, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. In these South American lands, we've seen that farming is important, and that grazing, both of sheep and of cattle, is a leading occupation. And we saw modern urban centers. These are among the main things to remember about the nations of the Plata, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay.